Friends, this is very urgent and important information regarding the new draft law number 14,405, which at first glance seems to have very noble goals. In reality, it becomes a powerful tool for centralizing power. To remove all politicians who are currently not aligned with the current line of power. And in fact, this tool can be used to completely destroy democracy in Ukraine, and now you'll understand why. We're going to break it down as much as possible. This is very important information for all Ukrainians, so if the fate of Ukraine matters to you, watch the video until the end and share it. And this bill in no way, in any form, should be allowed to pass a vote in the Verkhovna Rada, because this will actually be the beginning of the end for Ukrainian cities and for the uniqueness of Ukrainian cities. Now you'll see why we're starting immediately. So, in the conditions of war, blackouts, and constant shelling, almost every sector is undergoing its own changes, drastic changes, and this should also now apply to the activities of local councils. Deputies are leaving, some even write that they are being mobilized, but we know about all these mobilizations, very important person mobilizations, and they write that having a quorum to make important decisions is becoming a big problem, especially while the public's attention is focused on news from the front and power outages. In the Verkhovna Rada, they are considering a new draft law number 14,405 on ensuring the authority of local councils under martial law, which promises stability in the work of local councils. But all of this looks like tools for seizing power and cracking down on their political opponents. And in fact, even if we look at Kyiv, the adoption of this draft law would allow, for example, to remove the same Klitschko, the mayor of Kyiv, from office, or to remove Terekov, the mayor of Kharkiv, from office. And the same can be done in any city in Ukraine, and instead of them, simply appoint their own people, even though those positions were chosen by the residents of those cities. In other words, total centralization and total destruction of all dissenters, basically. So the draft law initially has a noble goal, to solve the problem of local councils being unable to function due to a lack of quorum. The duration of this law, if adopted, will be for the entire period of martial law and for another 6 months after it ends. Let's now go through this special procedure, and then we'll take a closer look at these hidden, let's say, tools that will allow them to destroy all opponents. So, in the event of early termination of the powers of some deputies of local councils of territorial communities, where elections were held back in 2020 under the majoritarian system, the council will be considered authorized if at least half of the deputies from the total composition are present. That is, for example, people elected 100 deputies, but even if only 50 remain, they will still be able to make decisions on behalf of all citizens in the same way, even though there are only 50% of all those who were originally elected and whom people trusted. If, as a result of some deputies' powers being terminated, less than half of the deputies remain on the council, then military administrations will be established within the territories of such areas. That means no one is talking about any elections anymore, no local elections, nothing at all. New heads of military administrations will simply be appointed from above, their own offices will be formed, so to speak, and this will mean only manual control over a particular city, certain resources, and so on. It is also planned to simplify the process of convening a session. Only 1/3 of the deputies will be able to initiate a session, which significantly weakens the position of the head of the community. And decisions during the session meetings will be made by a majority of the council members. At the same time, when determining the voting results, the head will be included in the council if he participates in the plenary session, and his vote will also be counted. It's just like in the Verkhovna Rada. For example, sometimes the people in the Verkhovna Rada can't gather enough votes to pass another questionable law. And imagine that now they just change the legislation themselves, saying, what if only 100 people vote instead of 225 or 226? If 100 people vote, we'll also pass this law, and it will affect all of Ukraine. That's about as absurd as it gets. You know, it's the same as just canceling voting altogether, just getting rid of all this clowning around with these votes. And then someone alone or a group of people will just write some notes, and that will be considered the laws of Ukraine. That's pretty much what it looks like. Unfortunately, this is called usurpation of power. What risk does the new draft law pose? We finally reached the most interesting part, the creation of military administrations when crossing the border with less than half of the deputies present. This innovation opens up opportunities for the forceful appointment of military administrations. Through artificially encouraging deputies to resign their mandates, these deputies can be bought off, they can be promised some money, some kickbacks, so that they give up their mandates. Someone is appointed there, and 49% of the deputies remain. For example, a military administration is formed, everyone is dismissed, and local corruption flows are redistributed, strengthening their power and influence. It seems very simple to me. It is also worth paying attention to the selectivity of the bill, since most of its provisions apply exclusively to communities where elections were held under the majoritarian system. A completely logical question arises. What should communities with a proportional system do? In fact, local councils of large cities will continue to operate under the old rules, and the changes will only affect small communities, which undermines the unity of the status of local self-government. This is so that it would be possible to various districts, villages, and so on could once again be subordinated to their own order, so that everything could be controlled. Next, the rule of public reporting by deputies to the community is also being violated, since Article 12 of the new draft allows local councils not to apply the requirements for public reporting, citing security factors. As for the form and methods of reporting, they will now be entirely determined at the discretion of the local authorities. So now, in fact, deputies will not be controlled in any way by the community, society, public organizations, and so on. They can just do whatever they want, and nothing will happen to them for it. This is just total lawlessness. If the Verkhovna Rada passes this bill, it will show they're working against the people of Ukraine. We must remember this. Another questionable provision is Article 10 of the draft, which allows for the early termination of the powers of a village, settlement, or city head by a decision of the relevant council, adopted by secret ballot with a 2/3 majority of the council's deputies. With the easier session procedures and ability to operate with fewer members, these changes could enable new abuses and political schemes. The proposed draft law is ambiguous. It seeks to address local community quorum issues, but also risks undermining democracy, transparency, and enabling removal of political opponents. You know, under the pretext that we are at war, in fact, what is happening now is simply the usurpation of power at the local level, and we see that it is happening quite successfully. Unfortunately, and I'll repeat myself, if this bill is passed, if it becomes law, then we can clearly understand that even if the war ends, even if preparations for elections begin, by that time all opposition groups to the current government at the local level will already have been destroyed. And everything that will happen there will simply be preparations for the next elections. This must not be allowed under any circumstances because it strongly reeks of some kind of Russian politics. Yes, when only the appearance of legality is created there, and then everything is decided by a group of certain individuals. And I really don't want it to look exactly the same in Ukraine, but after this bill is passed, it's only a matter of time before it all happens. Especially, this should not be done against the backdrop of the corruption scandals that are currently being investigated. In my opinion, this is very, very important, and it will have a direct impact on the future and the well-being of Ukraine as a state and the Ukrainian people as a whole. What do you think about this? Write in the comments. It will be very interesting to read your opinion. I wish you all, my friends, as always, a great day. See you next time.